Thank you, President Officer. I move the motion in my name. It is a delight and an honour to open this debate marking Human Rights Day 2024. This year's theme is Our Rights, Our Future Right Now. It asks us to reflect on how human rights are a pathway to solutions and a route to a more peaceful, equitable and sustainable world. It is a reminder of the transformative power of human rights. It is fundamentally a message of hope. We are not only marking the signing of the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, but also the founding of the Council of Europe 75 years ago. One of its founding instruments was the European Convention on Human Rights, which laid the cornerstone for a future based on human rights justice and forms part of our domestic law through the Human Rights Act in 1998. It is through the ECHR, along with over 200 treaties, conventions and protocols, that the Council of Europe upholds the rights of millions, holding governments accountable and ensuring that the principles of freedom, dignity and justice are upheld. In the face of war in Europe and the regression of human rights and fundamental freedoms across the region, the work of the Council of Europe remains critical. Indeed, the existence of the ECHR and the various international human rights instruments signed and ratified by the UN member states have never been more vital. The world can feel like an increasingly uncertain place, with values we once took for granted now routinely challenged. Fundamental rights are threatened by a confluence of attacks on civil liberties, a cost of living crisis that has pushed people into poverty and destitution, and a climate crisis which is increasingly devastating the homes and the livelihoods of the most vulnerable in our global community. Today is therefore an opportunity for this Parliament to come together and stand firmly behind the message that human rights are a force for good. It is a chance to show our collective resolve and to recommit to respecting, protecting and fulfilling human rights in everything we do. For as Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has said, human rights have the power to unify us at a time when we need to come together to contend with the existential challenges we face as humanity. It is clear then that human rights must remain at the centre of renewed action for global peace. In the face of interconnected challenges of climate change, war and population displacement, the hard work of progress can never cease. The devastating full-scale invasion of Ukraine goes on and looks like it will enter a third year. There is still no sign of a ceasefire in Gaza, nor sustained progress towards unimpeded access to humanitarian assistance. And over the weekend, we witnessed and welcomed the fall of the brutal regime in Syria. We join the international community in calling for a peaceful and inclusive political solution that puts the Syrian people first and for humanitarian aid to reach those most in need. The people of Syria have endured unimaginable suffering under the dictatorship of Assad. Their future must now be determined through a peaceful transition that upholds the rights of all Syrians. Presiding Officer, these are just some of the collective challenges the world faces. They require collective solutions underpinned by the shared values set out in our international human rights treaties and agreements. Now, in Scotland, we have been on a journey and there remains much to do. Advancing human rights is central to this government's mission to eradicate the scourge of child poverty, build better public services and to tackle the climate emergency. We should all be proud of this Parliament's work to incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law. The UNCRC Act is helping create a culture of everyday accountability for children's rights across our public authorities, which will make a very real difference to the lives of children and young people in Scotland. And we have further to go, which is why this government has committed to continue work towards a human rights bill that will incorporate further international standards, including important economic and social rights, and make them part of domestic law.
Jeremy Balfour.
I'm grateful to Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention on that point. Is the government's intention to introduce that bill in this session? Will we see the bill before the next election?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I've been clear, and I'll come on to this later in my remarks, about the government's continued commitment to the Human Rights Bill, but this will be a bill that will be introduced in the next session. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that we have a new UK government who we have the opportunity to build a genuine working relationship with on human rights. And I'm afraid, with respect to Mr Balfour, that is not the same for his party when they were in government at a UK level. This will help, Presiding Officer, our human rights culture in Scotland when this bill will be passed. It will allow the culture in Scotland's public services to develop and ensure that where rights are not being realised, that this is addressed. It will be complementary to our ongoing work to advance a culture of equality, inclusion and human rights in Scotland, including our proposed mainstreaming strategy, which is currently being consulted upon. Now, as I've said, we have taken the decision to take more time to work on the Human Rights Bill before it's introduced. And I again would put on record that I very much recognise the frustration, indeed the anger that this has caused for many who have worked so hard over so many years on this issue. I do feel, however, that the extra time that we will take over the next 18 months will give us the opportunity to develop this bill still further and to make it stronger. And that is my absolute determination, not just to deliver a bill, but to deliver the strongest bill possible and a workable piece of legislation. Because we need a bill that will deliver on our shared ambition to truly embed a human rights culture across public services. The election of the new UK Government has presented an opportunity to explore the challenges which we have previously had, including how the constraints of the devolution settlement have limited our ability to truly transform incorporation legislation. And we saw that during our debates on the Human Rights Bill Now Act. We want to work on the relationship that we have with the new UK Government to build a constructive and a collaborative relationship on human rights, and I do hope that we will see progress there. But in the meantime, Presiding Officer, it's important that we use this 18 months to further strengthen that bill, as I've said. And we'll shortly share with partners a detailed plan for taking forward bill development over the remainder of this parliamentary session. And as part of this, we're given careful consideration to the publication of a policy paper, building on last year's public consultation and setting out our thinking on the bill overall to support constructive engagement as we continue to test and refine proposals still further. Presiding Officer, at this point I also want to commend and pay tribute to the role of organisations like the Scottish Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Consortium for Scotland and the many other civil society actors for their positive collaboration with Government to help develop proposals to this point. I know they are deeply, deeply disappointed at the decision that this Government has taken. These organisations, along with individuals that have shared their experiences on how human rights play out in their day-to-day lives, are our human rights defenders. Those individuals who, through those organisations, have taken part in previous consultations, their work remains at the heart of what this Government does in our continued work to advance human rights. Nothing that they have contributed to will be lost, and it will be the foundation of the work that we will continue to do for the rest of this Parliament to make this bill as strong as they want it to be, and indeed that they have a right to expect from this Parliament. Certainly.
Alex Coham.
I'm very grateful for the Cabinet Secretary taking my intervention. I recognise what she says about moving the bill into the next session, but does she recognise there are steps we can take in this Parliament to advance the cause of human rights, not least looking at our age of criminal responsibility? She's heard me say many times that we are suboptimal in this country. In fact, we are behind Russia and we are behind China in terms of the age at which we determine children responsible for their criminal actions. Can she speak to the progress the Government is making on that topic?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not sure whether Mr Cole-Hamilton can read my speech from where he's sitting, but the next page is next steps, which I'll go on to some of that. But I didn't have a part in my speech about that particular issue, but he'll be aware that this is something which the Scottish Government is committed to reviewing, and we will keep him updated on that process. But on the next steps, Presiding Officer, they are the organisations that are disappointed that the bill is not coming forward have rightly challenged us to do more with the time that we have within this parliamentary session. It's important that we can still take action in a number of areas, despite the bill not going forward, and that's in particular relation to protecting economic and social rights. In my own portfolio, for example, we've developed interventions like the Scottish Child Payment and our social security system. We'll move forward, should the budget pass, with the effective scrap of the two-child cap. That is the work that we can continue at a policy level. But it is always important that we continue to ensure that we can do everything that we can in those months that we do have left within this session, and I do believe there is a lot that we can do together, Presiding Officer. In conclusion, I hope my remarks today have set an international context to the importance of human rights, but also the important domestic context and the fact that we must continue to challenge ourselves as a Parliament, and we certainly do as a government, about how we need to go further and make sure that we are developing the human rights framework within the Scottish Parliament and within Scotland, which people have long campaigned for, and they are quite right to do so, Presiding Officer.